She heard her own name come out of a stranger's mouth and smiled. Not because it was flattering, because it was the last mistake Lorenzo Moretti would ever make. For 23 years, Valentina Ashcroft Moretti stood at the edge of an empire built on fear, blood, and silence. She gave that empire her name, her loyalty, and every quiet sacrifice a woman makes when she chooses to love a powerful and dangerous man. Then one Tuesday morning, over Eggs Benedict and champagne at 11 Madison, a 24-year-old girl laughed too loudly about a sapphire necklace, and everything Valentina had buried came roaring back to the surface. This is the story of a woman who was written off, stolen from, and left behind, and what happened when she decided she was done being patient. If you've made it this far, hit that like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't slow down. The morning it began, Valentina wasn't thinking about war. She was thinking about coffee, specifically whether the new French press her housekeeper had ordered from some boutique catalog would produce anything remotely worth the $240 it cost. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti penthouse on the 43rd floor, wearing a silk robe the color of old ivory, and watched the city below begin its Tuesday arrangements. Delivery trucks, dog walkers, the first hard-hatted workers of the morning streaming into the scaffolded skeleton of a building going up 2 blocks east. New York doing what it always does, constructing itself relentlessly over the ruins of what came before. She was 46 years old. She had lived in this penthouse for 11 years. Before that, the brownstone on West 74th. Before that, the apartment in the West Village where she and Lorenzo had first lived as newlyweds, where the radiator knocked through the night and they had used furniture her mother helped her pick out from estate sales and antique shops in Hudson. That was another lifetime. That woman felt like a photograph she'd found in someone else's drawer. The French press, for the record, made excellent coffee. She was on her second cup when her phone lit up on the kitchen island. A message from her assistant, Nadia, 29, efficient to the point of being borderline frightening, and one of the very few people in Valentina's life who said exactly what she meant without decoration. Reminder, 11 a.m. lunch at 11 Madison, Isabel confirmed. Also, Lorenzo called the house phone at 7:40. Didn't leave a message. Valentina read the text twice, not because she didn't understand it, because of the second part. Lorenzo never called the house phone. He had stopped doing that around the time he stopped pretending that the phone in his pocket, the second one, the one she wasn't supposed to know about, was a work line. That was roughly 14 months ago. She had not brought it up. She had not asked questions. She had absorbed the information the way a woman absorbs many things over the course of a long marriage. Quietly, thoroughly, and with a composure that could be mistaken for acceptance. It was not acceptance. She set the phone face down on the marble counter and finished her coffee standing up. 11. Madison was the kind of restaurant where the lighting made everyone look like they were being photographed for something aspirational, and the noise level was calibrated precisely to the point where you could hear the table next to you if you wanted to, and pretend you couldn't if you didn't. Valentina had eaten there more times than she could count. Business lunches with the Ashcroft Foundation Board, anniversary dinners in the early years when Lorenzo still made reservations, a birthday breakfast once, just herself and Isabel after her mother's first round of chemotherapy. The place held memories in layers, the way old buildings hold ghosts in their walls. She arrived at 11:04, which was deliberate. Isabel Crane was constitutionally incapable of being on time, and showing up first meant sitting alone in a room full of people who knew exactly who she was, which Valentina had learned to dislike somewhere around her 40th year. The maitre d', a slim man named Philippe, who had worked there for a decade and always greeted her by name, led her to the table in the second room, near the window overlooking Madison Avenue. She ordered sparkling water and the tasting menu and texted Isabel a single question mark, which was their agreed-upon signal for "Where are you and why are you embarrassing me?" Isabel arrived at 11:17 in a yellow blazer that cost more than most people's car payments, kissed Valentina on both cheeks, and immediately launched into a story about a parking situation on 26th Street that Valentina listened to with one ear while scanning the room the way she always did, cataloging faces, noticing configurations, reading the room the way her father had taught her to read a room before she was old enough to attend these kinds of lunches herself. Richard Ashcroft had believed that a woman's greatest weapon was her powers of observation. Most people are broadcasting everything they feel, he used to say, sitting across from her at the dinner table when she was 12, 13, 14. They just assume no one's listening. Valentina had spent her entire adult life listening. That was how she heard them. The table was 3 to her left and slightly behind her, a cluster of 4 young women, mid-20s, the specific brand of Manhattan social creature that ran on brunch, brand deals, and the gravitational pull of wealthy men. Valentina registered them the way she registered most things in a room: peripheral, ambient, filed, and forgotten. Until she heard the word necklace. It wasn't the word itself. It was the pitch of the voice, high, pleased, a little too loud, the voice of someone who wanted to be overheard. Valentina didn't turn. She kept her eyes on Isabel, who was now describing a fight with her interior designer, but something shifted in her attention. A lock clicking open that she hadn't realized was shut. He gave it to me last month. I keep waiting for the right occasion, and honestly, I figured what better than Tuesday lunch? Laughter from the table, the particular laughter of a small group enjoying the performance of one of its members. Brielle, that thing is insane. What is that stone? Sapphire. Antique. He said it's been in some family for like 100 years, which sounds like something men say when they want to justify not putting it in a box from Cartier. More laughter. Valentina's hand, resting in her lap, went still. But honestly, it's gorgeous. And she doesn't deserve it anymore. That's basically what he said. She stopped hearing Isabel entirely. She turned her head just slightly, the angle of a woman glancing around a room without purpose, and she found the table. 4 women. The one speaking was seated nearest to the window. Young, pretty in an unfinished way, dark hair, a green silk blouse. At her throat, catching the light with the quiet confidence of something that had never needed to announce itself. A sapphire pendant, oval cut, deep blue, ringed with old rose gold filigree in the pattern her grandmother had described to her when Valentina was 9 years old, sitting in a bedroom in the Ashcroft estate in Connecticut, watching her grandmother lift it from a velvet case and say, "This goes to you. When it's time. This has always been yours." The blue sovereign. The necklace that had been locked in the private vault in the Moretti penthouse for the past 3 years since Valentina had brought it back from the estate after her mother passed. The necklace that was supposed to be in that vault right now. The necklace that was hanging around the throat of a 24-year-old girl who had just described Valentina as someone who no longer deserves it. Everything in Valentina's chest went very cold and very quiet. Isabel was still talking. Valentina could see her mouth moving. She nodded once, because nodding was automatic, because she had spent 23 years becoming the kind of woman whose composure did not crack in public. And that instinct did not stop working just because the floor had dropped out from under her. She looked at the necklace for exactly 3 more seconds, long enough to be certain, long enough to memorize the girl's face. Then she looked away, picked up her sparkling water, and took a calm, measured sip. "Sorry," she said, interrupting Isabel mid-sentence with the smooth ease of someone changing the channel. "Before I forget, did the foundation board finalize the November dates?" Isabel blinked. "What?" "Yes, I think so. Are you all right? You look a little—" "I'm fine." The smile that came with it was warm and entirely real-looking. 23 years of practice. "Tell me about the dates." She went to the vault that afternoon. Not immediately. She had 2 more hours of lunch with Isabel, a call with the Foundation's legal counsel at 2, and a standing appointment with her trainer at 4 that she kept not because she particularly wanted to work out, but because the discipline of keeping it felt necessary. She kept all of it. She moved through the afternoon like water moving around stone, smooth, purposeful, leaving no trace of disturbance. It was 6:15 when she finally stood in the study, the door closed behind her, and keyed in the code for the private vault built into the wall behind the Ashcroft family portrait. Her parents, herself at 14, her younger brother Edmund, who had died at 22 in a car accident outside of Boston, and whose absence still lived in Valentina's chest like a room she didn't go into anymore. The vault opened. She knew before she fully looked. She had known since the restaurant, but there is a difference between knowing and seeing, and when the shelf where the blue sovereign had rested in its velvet case was empty, The velvet case gone too, the space around it undisturbed as though the necklace had simply ceased to exist. Valentina stood there and let herself feel the full shape of it. 23 years. She had given 23 years to this man. She had absorbed his silences and his absences, and the specific loneliness of being married to someone whose attention moved toward you like a tide that always seemed to be going out. She had attended dinners and charity events and sat across from men whose businesses were funded by things she had chosen not to think about too carefully, because that was the arrangement. She was the face that made the empire respectable, and in exchange she had security and position and the particular social armor of being Lorenzo Moretti's wife. She had told herself many times that there were worse arrangements, that most marriages were arrangements of one kind or another, that loyalty, once given, had its own integrity regardless of what it bought. The empty vault said something different. It said, "You were never a partner. You were inventory." She closed the vault, straightened the portrait, walked to the bar cart by the window, and poured herself 2 fingers of the scotch that Lorenzo kept for guests, and didn't know she occasionally drank. And she stood there in the darkening study and looked at the city below. Same view as the morning, same towers, same relentless construction. And she let herself feel every single thing she needed to feel for exactly 11 minutes. Grief, fury, humiliation, and underneath all of it, quieter than the rest, something that had no name except maybe the feeling of a woman finding the floor after a long fall. Then she set down the glass, went to her desk, and picked up her phone. She did not call Lorenzo. She called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb had been the Ashcroft family's primary legal counsel for 21 years, which meant he had handled the estate proceedings after her father's death, the trust restructuring after her mother's, and the various corporate arrangements that came with being an Ashcroft in New York. He was 63, unremarkable looking in the way that very effective people sometimes were, medium height, graying hair, the kind of face that gave nothing away in any room. And Valentina trusted him the way she trusted very few people, completely, based on evidence accumulated over time. He picked up on the second ring. "Valentina, I need to see you tomorrow morning, early, before 9. A brief pause. Marcus had worked with the Ashcroft family long enough to recognize the specific register of her voice right now, and to understand that the appropriate response was not a question. 8 o'clock, my office. Thank you. She hung up. Sat very still for a moment. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk, the one that locked, that she had changed the lock on 4 years ago without telling Lorenzo and without him ever noticing. And she took out the small leather notebook where she had been quietly writing things down for the past 14 months. The second phone. The late nights. The business trips that didn't quite track against the travel expenses she could see in the shared accounts. The name she had overheard once, on a call he'd taken in the bathroom of their car service, because he didn't realize the partition wasn't entirely soundproof. The transfers she'd noticed, small ones, the kind designed not to attract attention, moving in patterns that had struck her as strange. She had written all of it down, not because she knew what she was building, but because her father had taught her to observe. And observation without record was just memory, and memory could be doubted, dismissed, reframed. Paper could not. She opened to a fresh page and wrote 3 words at the top. The Blue Sovereign. Then she sat back and began to think. Chum. Lorenzo came home at 10:42. She heard the elevator, the specific sound of his key, the way he moved through the front hallway. Heavier than he used to be, less careful. He had been a striking man when they married. He was still a formidable one at 51, the kind of man whose presence in a room shifted the air pressure slightly, whose authority was not performed but worn, like a second skeleton. She had found that quality magnetic once. Lately, it just made rooms feel smaller. She was in bed with a book she wasn't reading when he came to the bedroom doorway. "You're up late," he said. "Couldn't sleep." She turned a page. "How was the dinner?" "Long." He was already pulling off his jacket, moving toward the closet. Castellano wouldn't stop talking about the Meridian deal. Man could bore a statue. She turned another page. Lorenzo reappeared, undoing his cufflinks. He was watching her with the particular quality of attention she had come to recognize over the years. Not warm attention, not suspicious exactly, but the attention of a man who is running a constant low-level calculation about what the people around him knew. He had always been like this. She had mistaken it for intensity in the beginning. "You eat?" he asked. "With Isabel earlier." "Where?" She looked up from the book then, just briefly, with the mild curiosity of a woman reporting a perfectly ordinary afternoon. 11 Madison. Something moved behind his eyes. It was gone in a fraction of a second, smoothed over by a man who had spent his entire adult life controlling his tells. But she had been watching his face for 23 years. "Good food?" he said. "Always is." She went back to her book. "Come to bed. You look tired." He stood there for a moment longer than he should have. She could feel it without looking up, the weight of his attention, that calculation running harder than usual. Then he went to the bathroom, and she heard the faucet. She stared at the page in front of her without reading a word. Her hands were completely steady. Marcus's office occupied a corner of the 38th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue that had housed the Webb and Associates firm for longer than Valentina had been alive. The furniture was old and well-maintained, the kind of office that conveyed permanence rather than wealth. And the view of Midtown was partly obscured by a neighboring building in a way that somehow made it feel more honest. She arrived at 7:58 and found Marcus already at his desk with a legal pad and 2 coffees. He watched her sit down and didn't ask how she was, one of the things she most valued about him. "I need to know something," she said, "about the Ashcroft Family Trust." "All right. Is it possible for money to move out of it without my direct authorization?" Marcus set down his pen. "Legally? No. You and your brother were the sole remaining trustees after your mother's death. Edmund's share reverted to you. You're the primary trustee and the controlling interest is entirely yours." He paused. "But you're not asking about what's legal." "No," she said. "I'm not." He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a man who had just been handed something heavier than he expected and was deciding how to hold it. "How long have you suspected something?" 14 months of noticing. Last night, confirmed." "What was confirmed?" She told him. Not everything, not yet. The necklace, the girl at the restaurant. Her voice, the specific phrasing. She doesn't deserve it anymore. And the empty vault. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was very still. "The Blue Sovereign was an Ashcroft asset," he said slowly. "Documented in the estate inventory after your mother's death. It cannot be gifted or transferred without your written consent. Lorenzo has no legal authority over it, regardless of the marriage." "I know that. If he removed it from your private vault and transferred it as a gift to another person, that's theft, Valentina. It's theft with a paper trail. I know that too." She folded her hands on the table in front of her. "What I need to know is whether there are other paper trails. Whether the trust has been accessed in ways I haven't been told about. Whether there are accounts, transfers, arrangements that were designed to look like something ordinary." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "If there are," he said carefully, "and we go looking, you understand what we're opening." "Yes. Not just a divorce. Not just an asset dispute." "I understand what Lorenzo is," she said. It came out very quiet and very flat. "I have understood it for a long time. I am not naive about the nature of the empire I've been part of by association." She held his gaze. "But I am an Ashcroft before I am a Moretti. I have always been an Ashcroft first, and I want to know what has been taken from my family." Marcus picked up his pen, set it down again. Then he reached into the drawer of his desk and produced a second legal pad, fresh. "Tell me everything you've observed," he said. "Every transfer, every inconsistency, every name you've heard that didn't sit right. We start there." She opened her bag and placed the leather notebook on the table between them. His eyebrows went up slightly when he saw it. 14 months, she said. "You've been keeping records." "My father taught me to observe." She pushed the notebook toward him. "And I've had a lot of practice." The next 3 days she moved through her life as though nothing had changed. She attended a luncheon at the Frick. She sat on a panel for the Foundation's annual education initiative, said exactly what she needed to say, smiled exactly when smiling was appropriate. She had dinner with Lorenzo on Thursday. He was preoccupied, distracted in the particular way of a man carrying something he couldn't put down. And she asked him about his week and listened to his answers with the patient attention of a woman who had not spent the previous 72 hours systematically dismantling everything she knew about her own life. She slept beside him at night and did not dream. This was a skill she had developed without knowing she was developing it. The ability to partition. To hold the enormity of something in one compartment of herself while the rest of her continued to function, continued to walk through rooms and pour coffee and return phone calls. She had used it after Edmund died, after her father's first stroke, after the night she had stood in the bathroom of a hotel in Rome, the anniversary trip, Lorenzo's 11th hour gesture, the year she had first suspected something and dismissed it, and understood with a clarity she immediately buried that she had stayed not because she was happy, but because she did not know who she was without the architecture of this life. She knew now. She was finding out. Marcus called her on Saturday morning with a name she had never heard before. Carver Holdings, LLC, he said, Delaware registered, established 7 years ago. It appears in the records as a consulting firm retained by Moretti Capital on 3 separate occasions, standard arrangement, or it would look standard to someone not looking closely. But Carver Holdings has no public presence, no employees on record beyond a registered agent. Its filing address is a mail forwarding service in Wilmington that houses approximately 400 other shell entities, and 2 of the 3 consulting contracts list a signing officer named E. Moretti. Valentina stood in the kitchen with her coffee going cold. Lorenzo's brother? Eduardo, who, as far as your family records indicate, has no formal role in any Moretti business operation. Eduardo has never worked a day in his life, she said. He lives in Mallorca. Lorenzo considers him an embarrassment. Then Eduardo's name is either being used without his knowledge, Marcus said, or with his passive cooperation in exchange for something. Either way, the money passing through Carver Holdings, and we're looking at north of $12 million over 6 years, is moving somewhere. Our forensic accountant is following the trail. A pause. There's more, Valentina. Tell me. The Aurora Legacy Gala is in 6 weeks. She frowned. What does that have to do with... Moretti Capital is listed as a primary sponsor for the 3rd consecutive year, which means Lorenzo has a significant public-facing stake in appearing legitimate and untouchable at that event. Half of the city's financial and legal establishment will be in that room. Another pause, and she could hear something in his voice, the careful quality of a man presenting a possibility without quite advocating for it. If what we're finding is what I think it is, Valentina, the timing of that event matters. She was quiet. She looked out the kitchen window at the sky over Manhattan, flat gray and low, a sky that promised nothing. Let me understand what you've found so far, she said. 12 million, minimum, moving through a shell structure into what we're tracing as a set of private accounts with beneficial ownership obscured. The structure is sophisticated, but not impenetrable. Whoever designed it wasn't expecting scrutiny from inside the marriage. He paused. From the records timeline, it looks like this started within the first 2 years. He's been building something on the side, Valentina. Something that doesn't include you. She set her coffee down on the counter. 12 million. She ran through the calculations without meaning to, the way her mind had always run calculations. The trust distributions. The asset valuations. The Ashcroft family fortune that had come to her carrying the weight of everything her parents and grandparents had built. That she had brought into this marriage like a dowry she had been too proud and too young to properly protect. Keep following the trail, she said. I will. But Valentina... He stopped. Say it. Once we move forward formally, once we engage law enforcement or file anything, there's no controlled burn. Lorenzo will know the moment something is touched. He has contacts in places that would complicate a straightforward legal action. I know. Which means we only get one window, one moment where everything is in position and he can't counter before the damage is done. She was looking at the skyline again, that building going up, 2 blocks east. Steel frame, all potential, all the things it was going to be still hidden inside its own construction. Then we don't move, she said, until we're ready. And when we're ready? She thought about the restaurant. The girl's voice, too loud, too pleased. The necklace catching the light at her throat. She thought about standing in front of the empty vault with 2 fingers of stolen scotch and 11 minutes of allowed grief. She thought about what her father had said once, when she was 17 and had been publicly embarrassed at a school event by a girl who had spread rumors about her, come home furious, red-eyed, wanting to fight back immediately, wanting it loud and immediate and devastating. He had sat across from her at the dinner table and waited until she stopped talking, and then he had said, "The difference between a reaction and a response is the time it takes. Anyone can react. Only someone who understands the game can wait for the right moment to respond." She had been 23. Lorenzo had been 30, already a force in the room, already someone people made space for. She had stood at their first dinner party and watched him manage every person in that room with the ease of someone dealing cards he'd marked himself. She had thought, he is someone who knows the game. She understood now she had been one of the cards. "When we're ready," she said, "we move all at once. Everything, simultaneously. No warning." "The gala." "The gala," she confirmed. "But Marcus, I need the full picture before we get there. Everything. Not 12 million, everything." "I understand. And I need to know where Brielle Monroe fits into this." She had learned the girl's name that same afternoon at the restaurant. It hadn't taken much. A quiet inquiry through Nadia, a social media search, 2 phone calls. Brielle Monroe, 24, daughter of a real estate developer from Westchester, a year out of college and moving through Manhattan's social scene with the particular velocity of someone newly arrived and still figuring out which doors opened. Not sophisticated, not connected, just young and pretty and available in the specific way Lorenzo had always needed the women around him to be. "I want to know how long this has been happening." "I can find that." "Do." She picked up her coffee, remembered it was cold, and poured it down the sink. "One more thing," she said. "Yes." "The necklace. I want documentation of its provenance, its estate value, its status as an Ashcroft heirloom going back to original acquisition. I want an airtight case for what it is and who it legally belongs to. Can you pull that together?" "Already in the file," Marcus said, and she could hear the quiet satisfaction of a man who had anticipated the question. "Your grandmother purchased it from an estate in Florence in 1962. Your mother documented it in 2 separate estate inventories. It was never jointly held. It's listed as a personal Ashcroft asset, not a marital one. So Lorenzo had absolutely no legal right to give it to anyone. None whatsoever." Valentina set the empty mug on the counter. "Good," she said. "Then we know exactly what we're dealing with." Nadia found Brielle Monroe's contact information without asking why she was being asked to find it, which was one of the many reasons Valentina valued her. She placed the slip of paper on Valentina's desk on Monday morning without comment, poured coffee, and disappeared back into the outer office as quietly as she had come. Valentina looked at the phone number for a long time. She did not call it, not yet. Some pieces had to be moved before others. The financial investigation needed time. Marcus needed to finish the forensic picture. The full shape of what Lorenzo had built, the shell companies, the hidden accounts, the 7 years of careful diversion, needed to be complete before any part of the plan could move, because you did not dismantle something like this piecemeal. You waited until you could knock out every support at once and let the whole structure fall. But she kept the number, and she thought, more than once, about the girl at the restaurant table. Brielle Monroe, who had laughed about the necklace, who had used the word deserve like a woman confident she was standing on solid ground. She wondered how long it would take the girl to realize the ground had been borrowed, that the man who had given her an heirloom that didn't belong to him had been making promises the way he made all his promises, with total conviction and no intention of keeping them. She wondered whether, when the truth came, it would break the girl or sharpen her. She found herself hoping, unexpectedly, for the second. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Valentina's life, and they were strange for a reason she had not anticipated. They were ordinary. She continued to move through her days with the practiced grace of 23 years. Foundation meetings, lunches. The annual visit to the Ashcroft estate in Connecticut to oversee the winter preparations. Walking through those rooms she had grown up in with their particular smell of old wood and good plaster and her mother's ghost in every corner. She took a call from her cousin in London who wanted advice about a contract dispute. She had her hair done. She attended a gallery opening in Chelsea and stood with a glass of white wine and spoke to 3 separate people about things she could not remember the following morning. Lorenzo, meanwhile, was restless in a way she recognized without being able to name. He was making more calls than usual. He was going to meetings that weren't on the shared calendar. He came home one evening with the particular energy of a man who has just been reassured of something, and she made dinner conversation and let it wash over her. Marcus, in the background, was building a case. By the end of the third week, the number was no longer 12 million. It was 27. She sat in Marcus's office and looked at the figure on the forensic accountant's summary sheet and did not make a sound for a long time. The transfers accelerated in the last 2 years, Marcus said. He was leaning forward slightly, the legal pad in front of him dense with notes. The structure is layered. Carver Holdings is the first pass, but there are 2 more entities below it. One in Cyprus, one in the Caymans. The beneficial ownership of the Cayman account, when traced, resolves to a name we've seen once before. Lorenzo. No, Valentina. He paused. It resolves to you. She looked up. He set up an account in your name, Marcus said carefully. In the Caymans, without your knowledge. The account has received transfers and in 2 instances dispersed funds to a third party. On paper, you are the account holder. On paper, you authorize the disbursements. The room was very quiet. He was building a liability, she said. If this ever came to light, and he was the one who brought it to light, you would be the named account holder for an offshore account receiving funds from an Ashcroft trust. The liability would land on you. She sat back in her chair. 27 million skimmed from her family's money, a shell structure designed to survive scrutiny, an account in her name as a failsafe, a trap laid so carefully she hadn't even known she was standing in it. He hadn't just been stealing, he had been building an exit that, if it went wrong, would leave her holding the wreckage. She thought about the house phone call at 7:40 in the morning, didn't leave a message. She thought about the way he had watched her across the bedroom the night she came home from 11 Madison, the calculation behind his eyes. He was already moving. He had sensed something shifting, and he was already moving. How long do we have? She said. It wasn't a question. I don't know. If he suspects you know, he could accelerate the timeline. Try to move assets before you can freeze them. Then we need to move faster. The gala is in 4 weeks. 4 weeks. She looked at the figure on the page again. 27 million, the necklace, the girl, the account in her name. 23 years. 4 weeks is enough, she said. There's one more thing I need to tell you. Marcus's voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but more careful. The forensic accountant flagged a pattern in the Carver Holdings disbursements. Some of the money moved in ways that suggest it's not just hidden. It's been used to fund certain activities, arrangements that Lorenzo would not want examined by a regulatory body. She understood what he was not saying. His operations, she said. Portions of it? Yes. Which means that if the financial exposure goes public, it doesn't just trigger a civil matter, it creates potential grounds for a criminal investigation. Marcus nodded once. She thought about the men at the dinners, the ones whose names she had never asked about too carefully, whose businesses she had understood in the abstract, whose presence in Lorenzo's orbit she had chosen not to examine. She had told herself it was pragmatism. She understood now it had been complicity of the passive kind, the kind that survives best in comfortable rooms with good lighting. She was an Ashcroft. Her family had built things, real things, hospitals, schools, endowments that had sent hundreds of kids to college who couldn't have gone otherwise. Her mother had put her name on things that lasted. Her father had believed that a legacy was what you built that still stood after you were gone. Lorenzo had been using her family's money to fund things that destroyed. She stood up. Draw up the full asset freeze application, she said. I want it ready to file the morning after the gala. I want every account, every entity, every document we have prepared and sitting with your contacts at the appropriate agencies, ready to submit on my instruction. She picked up her bag. And I want the necklace documentation included in the filing, the theft of a documented Ashcroft estate asset. Everything at once, Marcus said. Everything at once. She paused at the office door. And Marcus, the Cayman account, the one in my name. Yes. Trace every disbursement. I want to know exactly where that money went. He made a note. I'll have it by end of week. She left. In the elevator going down, she stood very straight and watched the floors tick past and thought about 4 weeks, about everything that had to be built in that time, quietly, precisely, without a single visible crack in the surface. She thought about her grandmother's voice, describing the necklace. This has always been yours. She thought about the girl at the restaurant table, the laugh, the necklace catching the light. She thought about Lorenzo in the bedroom doorway that night, watching her with his calculation running. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She walked out into the cold Manhattan air and pulled her coat tighter and thought about something Marcus had said 3 weeks ago in their very first meeting. We only get one window. One moment where everything is in position and he can't counter before the damage is done. One window, 4 weeks. She had spent 23 years being careful. She had spent 14 months taking notes. She had spent the last 3 weeks watching the full shape of the trap resolve itself around her, and she had not flinched, and she had not moved, and she had not given Lorenzo Moretti a single thing to read in her face. Now it was time to build the counter trap. She flagged a cab on Lexington, got in, looked at her phone, a text from Nadia about a foundation meeting, a missed call from Isabel, nothing from Lorenzo, which meant either he was busy or he was careful. And then, almost without deciding to, she opened the contact that Nadia had written on that slip of paper 3 weeks ago that she had since added to her phone. She looked at the name, Brielle Monroe. She looked at it for a long time. The cab moved uptown through afternoon traffic. The city ran past the windows, gray and relentless and indifferent. Valentina put the phone back in her bag. Not yet, but soon, because there was one piece of this plan she hadn't told Marcus about yet. One piece that didn't involve forensic accountants or legal filings or the orchestrated public exposure of $27 million in stolen assets. One piece that required something simpler and more dangerous. The truth. Spoken directly, woman to woman, across all the lies Lorenzo had built between them. She didn't know yet if Brielle Monroe was someone who could hear it. But the Aurora Legacy Gala was 4 weeks away, and if Valentina Ashcroft Moretti had learned anything in 23 years of standing beside the most feared man in New York, it was this. You didn't win a war by dismantling your enemy. You won it by making sure, when the moment came, that they were standing completely alone. Lorenzo Moretti had no idea that the woman he had stolen from, lied to, and used as a scapegoat was, at this very moment, riding uptown in a taxi and deciding exactly how to make sure that was true. He had made one fundamental mistake, the same mistake powerful men always made about patient women. He had assumed her stillness was passivity. He had no idea it was aim. The number that kept coming back to her was not 27 million, it was 9. 9 years old, sitting on the edge of her grandmother's bed in the Connecticut estate, watching Eleanor Ashcroft lift the blue sovereign from its velvet case with both hands, the way you lift something you understand the weight of. The afternoon light through the bedroom curtains had caught the stone and thrown a small blue shadow across the white coverlet, and Valentina had reached out one finger to touch it without being told she could, and her grandmother had not stopped her. "That's right," Eleanor had said. "You feel it. You should always feel the things that belong to you." She had felt it. Cool, smooth, the facets of the oval stone precise against her fingertip. Real in the way that very few things were real to a 9-year-old. Absolutely and without question. She was thinking about that fingertip, that blue shadow, when her phone rang at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks before the Aurora Legacy Gala, and the number on the screen was one she did not recognize. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Is this Valentina Moretti?" The voice was young, careful, the way people sound when they've rehearsed what they're going to say and are hoping it comes out right. "Who's calling?" A breath on the other end. Short, like someone steadying themselves. "My name is Brielle Monroe." Valentina sat very still on the edge of the bed. The bedroom was gray with early light, Lorenzo's side empty. He had not come home the previous night, which had stopped surprising her somewhere around the 8th month of observations in the leather notebook. She said nothing. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," Brielle said. "I get that. I just—" A pause. The sound of someone swallowing something difficult. "There are some things I'm confused about, and I think you're the only person who can tell me the truth." "What kind of things?" Not a question. Flat, controlled, giving nothing. "The necklace," Brielle said. The room was very quiet. Valentina looked at her own hands in her lap. "What about it?" "He told me it was his mother's, that it had been in his family. He said, another breath, shakier this time. He said his wife had put it in storage and didn't care about it anymore, that it was just sitting in a vault somewhere collecting dust. The last word came out with a strange quality, almost like she was reporting something she'd heard in a foreign language and was only now understanding the translation. But I started looking into it. I don't know why, something felt wrong. And I found your family's name attached to it. An auction record from 1962, and then an estate filing from when your mother passed. It's listed as an Ashcroft asset. Valentina closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Where did you find the estate filing? Public records. I know it sounds strange, but I used to work for an estate attorney before I moved to the city. I know how to look things up. A pause. Mrs. Moretti, did he steal it from you? She opened her eyes. Outside the window, the city was starting its day. She could hear the first low pressure of traffic from 43 floors below, the faint machinery of 8 million people beginning to move. The necklace, Valentina said slowly, has been in my family for 63 years. My grandmother purchased it. My mother documented it in 2 estate inventories. It is listed formally and legally as a personal Ashcroft asset. It is not jointly held. Lorenzo has no rights to it under any interpretation of our marital agreements. She paused. It was in my private vault until approximately 6 weeks ago. Silence on the other end. A long silence, the kind that has a shape to it. Oh, Brielle said, very quietly. And then, after a moment that stretched between them like something physical. I'm so sorry. Valentina stood up from the bed, walked to the window. Below, the city moved. How long? She said. How long what? How long have you been involved with my husband? Another silence. The girl's breathing had changed. She could hear it, slightly unsteady. Someone trying to hold something together. 8 months. 8 months. Valentina ran the number against the observations in her notebook and felt them line up with a precision that was almost elegant. He told me he was leaving you, Brielle said. It came out smaller than the other things she'd said, like she knew, even as she said it, what it sounded like. He said the marriage had been over for years, that you two were basically, he said it was just paperwork at this point. And you believed him. I did. The words were flat now, stripped of defense. I did, and I know how that sounds. It sounds like something he's very practiced at saying. Valentina's voice came out even, almost gentle, which surprised her slightly. She had expected anger. What she felt instead was something colder and more clarifying, the specific exhaustion of recognizing a pattern that has played out many times before you arrived at it. You're not the first, Brielle. I want you to understand that clearly, not because I want to hurt you with it, but because it matters for what you decide to do next. What do you mean? I mean that what you do with the necklace and what you do with what I've just told you is going to determine what kind of person you are on the other side of this. A long pause, then, what would you want me to do? Valentina thought about the Aurora Legacy Gala, the date on the invitation sitting in a silver tray on her dressing table. The ballroom she had walked through dozens of times, its geography as familiar to her as the layout of the penthouse, its attendee list as readable to her as a text she'd memorized. She thought about the one piece she hadn't told Marcus, the piece that required not a lawyer or a forensic accountant, but a 24-year-old woman willing to tell the truth in the right room at the right moment. Nothing yet, she said. I need you to do nothing yet. Can you do that? Yes, I can do that. Good. She paused. Don't contact Lorenzo. Don't tell him you called me. Don't change anything about how you behave with him for the next 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Yes. Another pause. The young woman was thinking. Valentina respected her for that, for not just agreeing reflexively, for actually sitting with it. And after 3 weeks, Brielle said, after 3 weeks I'm going to call you, and I'm going to ask you for something, and at that point you'll know everything I know, and you can decide what you want to do with it. Valentina looked at her own reflection in the window glass, faint, overlaid on the city below, a ghost over movement. You're not obligated to do anything. I want to be clear about that. What I'm building doesn't require your participation, but if you want to be part of making sure he can't do this to anyone else. I do? Brielle said. No hesitation. The speed of it carried its own information. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Valentina ended the call, stood at the window for another minute. Then she went to make coffee and began her day. Lorenzo came home that evening with the specific quality of energy that meant something had gone wrong for him professionally, and he had successfully managed it. The barely there satisfaction of a man who liked putting out fires he had often started himself. He came into the kitchen where Valentina was going through the Foundation's quarterly donor report, dropped his jacket on a chair with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been asked to pick anything up, and opened the refrigerator. "We need to talk about the gala," he said, his back to her. She did not look up from the report. "What about it?" "I'm bringing a client, someone I need to keep close right now." He turned from the refrigerator with a beer he had already opened. "European money. He likes the society events. Makes him feel like he's bought into something." "How many at your table?" "3 including me. You'll need to rearrange the seating chart." She looked up then, and she kept her face exactly neutral, not warm, not cold, just the ambient temperature of a woman who has handled logistics for 1,000 events and is simply absorbing one more variable. "I'll have Nadia adjust it." He watched her for a moment. That calculation again running behind his eyes like a process she couldn't see. "You hear from the Foundation about the November date?" "Still pending the venue confirmation." He nodded, apparently satisfied with the information and with her face, which gave him nothing. He took his beer toward the living room. At the doorway, he stopped. "I'm going to need to leave early, night before the gala. Business." "All right. You'll be fine going alone." Not a question. She had always been fine going alone. "Yes," she said. "I'll be fine." He left. She heard the television come on in the other room. She looked back at the donor report and did not see a single word on the page for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and texted Marcus 3 words. "He'll be there." The response came in under a minute. "Understood. Moving forward." 2 weeks before the gala, Marcus called her at noon with an update that required her to sit down. She was in the Foundation offices on Park Avenue, in the small conference room she used for private calls, and she sat in the chair at the far end of the table and listened to him go through the numbers with the methodical patience of a man who understood that information of this magnitude needed space to land. The Cayman account disbursements traced 2 payments, 7 months apart, to an entity called Meridian Venture Partners, which resolved, through 3 intermediary structures, to a real estate development project in New Jersey. A project where the primary contractor was a company with known ties to organized crime operations. A project that had received municipal approvals under circumstances that 2 separate journalists had flagged as potentially irregular in pieces published 18 months ago and quickly buried. Lorenzo had used the money diverted from the Ashcroft Family Trust to fund the financing layer of a real estate project with criminal infrastructure, under Valentina's name. She sat with that for a moment. "He was going to walk away," she said. "That was always the plan. Walk away with the money, leave me holding the liability for the Cayman account, and by the time anyone started asking questions, you would have looked like the principal," Marcus said, "and he would have had a clean exit, restructured assets, and the kind of distance that's very hard to close once someone has it." How long has he been planning this? Based on the entity formation dates, we think at least 4 years, possibly 5. The acceleration in transfers over the last 2 years suggests he was moving toward a timeline. What triggered the acceleration? A pause. "We think it's the Meridian project. It's facing delays, cost overruns. The municipal approval process is under renewed scrutiny after a city council change. If the project collapses, the liability flows back through the funding structure." Another pause. "Valentina, if Meridian fails and anyone follows the money, the Cayman account gets exposed. He needs to be gone before that happens. And he needs me to be the one left explaining it." "Yes." She looked at the wall of the conference room, plain white, professionally forgettable. "He was going to take 27 million, she said slowly. "Destroy my family's foundation's financial credibility, leave me exposed to a potential criminal investigation, and then disappear." That is what the financial record suggests. 23 years. She had given this man 23 years, and he had spent a significant portion of them engineering a life raft built from her family's money and a trap door built directly under her feet. The anger that moved through her then was different from the cold clarity of the past weeks. It was hot, sudden, the kind of thing that wanted to move her body. Stand, move, break something, make noise. She sat very still and let it pass through her and out the other side the way water passes through a filter. "I want the Meridian connection documented separately," she said, "as a standalone package. When we file, I want the Financial Crimes Unit to receive that documentation directly, not as part of the civil asset case, separately, simultaneously, from a different channel. That can be arranged. I want this to land from every direction at the same time. I want there to be no single point he can press to slow it down. Valentina." Marcus's voice was carefully measured. "Once this files, Lorenzo is going to know it came from you. The response from someone in his position, the people he has access to. I know. Your personal security. I know, Marcus." She cut him off, not unkindly. "I've been managing Lorenzo Moretti's idea of the world for 23 years. I know what I'm walking into." She paused. "But I also know something he doesn't." "What's that?" "He thinks I've been passive. He has 23 years of evidence that I absorb and adjust and stay quiet. He has no framework for what I actually am." A short silence. "Which is?" She thought about her father at the dinner table. Anyone can react. Only someone who understands the game can wait for the right moment to respond. "Someone who has been waiting," she said, "for exactly the right moment." 9 days before the gala, Lorenzo came home from a meeting and he was different. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would register to anyone who didn't know the specific grammar of his body language the way she did, after 23 years of living inside the same walls as this man. But she registered it the way you register a change in air pressure before a storm. Something shifted, something recalibrated, and the shift had a particular quality that she had not encountered before. He was afraid. She saw it in the bathroom mirror that night, not his reflection but hers, watching him behind her while she removed her earrings, his eyes moving through the space with the scanning quality of a man who was checking his perimeter. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his phone and put it down and looked at it again, and she thought, something has moved, something has shifted in his world without him controlling it, and he doesn't know what it is yet. She thought about what Marcus had said. If he suspects you know, he could accelerate the timeline. She took off the second earring and set it carefully in the tray. "Long day," she said. He looked up. That calculation, faster than usual. You look tired." He studied her face. She gave him nothing. Not warmth, not coldness, not the slight withdrawal that would have told him something was wrong. Just the mild, ambient expression of a woman going through the end of her evening. "I'm fine," he said. "Okay?" She moved toward the bathroom. At the door, she paused. "The gala seating is finalized, by the way. I put your client at table 7. Good sight lines to the stage, close enough to the right people." He blinked. As though he'd forgotten he'd asked her to do this. "Yeah, good. Good night, Lorenzo." She went into the bathroom and closed the door and turned on the faucet and stood at the sink with her hands gripping the cold edge of the marble and breathed. He was afraid, which meant someone had said something, or he'd noticed something, and this was the possibility that made her hands tighten on the marble. He was already moving. She turned off the faucet, looked at herself in the mirror, her own face, which she'd been managing for so long she sometimes forgot what it looked like when it was actually at rest. She texted Marcus from the bathroom. "Something's changed. He's accelerating. Whatever we're filing, it needs to be airtight by the end of this week. Not the gala. The filing needs to be ready now." The response took 4 minutes. "Already drafting. There's something else. Call me in the morning. Not urgent, but you need to know before the gala." She stared at the text. "Not urgent, but you need to know." She had learned, over the course of this, to parse Marcus's language with the precision of someone reading legal contracts, which, in a sense, she was. Not urgent meant it would not change the plan. You need to know meant it would change something about how she stood in that ballroom. She typed back, "First thing," set the phone on the counter, looked at herself again. 9 days. She was going to get through 9 more days of this. 9 more days of sleeping in the same bed as a man she now knew had spent years building a machine designed to destroy her. 9 more days of coffee at 6:30 and foundation calls and keeping her face at exactly the right temperature. She could do 9 days. She had done 23 years. Ishta. Marcus called at 7:50. She was already dressed, coffee in hand, seated at the kitchen island while Lorenzo was in the shower. She answered on the first ring. Tell me. It's about Brielle Monroe. A pause. She called my office yesterday afternoon, not looking for legal counsel. She was very clear about that. She said she wanted to know if the work we're doing on the financial matter was going to affect her in any way. Valentina set down her coffee. She found you. She found the firm. She knows you're represented by Ashcroft Family Counsel. She's smart, Valentina. She put together that whatever you're preparing was going to be public, and she wanted to know whether she needed to be worried. A pause. I told her I couldn't discuss any ongoing matters, but she left me with something. What? She said to tell you, I've been keeping records too. She said you'd understand what that meant. Valentina was very still. Records. A 24-year-old woman who had worked for an estate attorney, who had looked up public filings, who had called the wife of the man she was sleeping with to ask about the provenance of a stolen necklace, had been keeping records. What kind of records? She said. She didn't specify, but she said she has 8 months of... Her word was documentation, messages, transfers, promises. She said Lorenzo made her specific promises about the future that involved financial arrangements, and she has those in writing. The shower was still running in the other room. Valentina looked at the kitchen window, at the slice of city sky it framed, pale blue and sharp with the cold clarity of a November morning. Lorenzo had made Brielle financial promises, in writing, which meant there was a paper trail between him and the girl that was entirely separate from the Ashcroft Trust documentation. A trail she had created without knowing she was building evidence, the way people sometimes accidentally tell the truth when they think they're just talking. She wants to cooperate, Marcus said. I know. Do you want me to... No. Valentina picked up her coffee again. I told her I would call her. I'll call her today. A pause. But Marcus, her records. I want to see them before the gala. I'll reach out. And Marcus. She lowered her voice without meaning to, the automatic adjustment of a woman still living inside the thing she was trying to dismantle. If Lorenzo has been making her written financial promises, that changes his exposure. It's not just the trust. It's potential fraud on a separate track. I know. He's been running parallel cons, the long game with me, the short game with her. He thought they were separate. They're not, Marcus said. No. She heard the shower stop. They're not. She set the phone face down on the counter and picked up her coffee, and when Lorenzo walked out of the bedroom 7 minutes later, hair damp, jacket already on, she was reading the foundation report, and her face was exactly the face he expected her to have. He paused at the kitchen entrance. I'll be late tonight, he said. I have the foundation dinner. I'll probably be late too. He looked at her one more second too long. Then he left. She listened to the elevator close and held very still until the sound disappeared. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Brielle Monroe. The girl picked up on the second ring. I need to see you, Valentina said. Not on the phone. In person. Today, if possible. A short pause. Then, tell me where. There's a cafe on West 79th. Margot. Do you know it? I can find it. 2 o'clock. Valentina paused. And bring everything you have. She ended the call and sat alone in the silent kitchen of a penthouse that had never, in 11 years, felt like hers, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like the ground under her feet was solid. Not because everything was fixed, because everything was finally, irreversibly in motion. She thought about what Marcus had said. Once we move forward formally, there's no controlled burn. She thought about Lorenzo's face in the bathroom mirror, that fear, barely visible, running beneath the surface like water under ice. He was afraid because something had shifted without him knowing what. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the woman he had stolen from and lied to and used as a designated liability had spent 14 months taking notes, 3 weeks building a legal case, and the last hour learning that the girl he'd strung along with financial promises had been keeping her own. The cafe on West 79th was the kind of place that had survived 20 years of Manhattan's relentless appetite for novelty by being genuinely good at one thing, being invisible. No social media presence worth mentioning, no celebrity sightings, no design concept beyond wooden tables and decent light and coffee that didn't require a vocabulary to order. Valentina had discovered it 7 years ago during a walk she'd taken alone after a foundation meeting ran long, when she'd needed somewhere to sit that wasn't the penthouse and wasn't anywhere Lorenzo's people might register her presence. She arrived 12 minutes early and took the table in the back corner, facing the door. Brielle Monroe walked in at 1:58. In person, she was different from what the restaurant glimpse had given Valentina. Less the polished social creature of that Tuesday lunch and more, just a young woman, slightly underdressed for the cold in a camel coat that was good quality but not new, dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't spent much time on it. She looked around the cafe with the specific scanning quality of someone who was nervous and trying not to show it. And when she found Valentina's table, she crossed to it without hesitating. She sat down, didn't take off her coat. They looked at each other. Valentina had thought about this moment, had turned it over in the back of her mind during the nights of the past 3 weeks when sleep came late and shallow. And she had expected to feel something sharp and bilateral, the specific anger of a wronged woman looking at the woman who had, however unwittingly, been part of her wronging. What she actually felt was something more complicated and less satisfying. She felt the way she'd felt looking at that empty vault, like she was looking at evidence of someone else's crime, and the person across from her was also a piece of that evidence. "You found me fast," Valentina said. "I'm good at finding things." Brielle's voice was steadier than it had been on the phone. "It's the one useful thing I learned at that law firm, how to dig through public records without losing your mind." "How long did it take you to find Marcus's firm?" 2 days after we talked. I needed to know what you were building, whether I was going to be collateral damage." She paused. "Am I?" "Not if you're honest with me right now." Brielle reached into her bag. Large, worn at the strap, the kind of bag that held a life rather than a look, and produced a manila envelope, which she set on the table between them. She kept her hand on it for a moment before she pushed it across. "Everything," she said. 8 months, text messages, screenshots of transfers he made to a joint account he opened without telling me the full picture, emails where he made specific representations about our future together, and she stopped. "And?" Brielle's jaw tightened slightly. "A recording from 3 weeks ago, before I called you. He was drunk, which he never really gets, and he said some things about the plan, about leaving." A pause. "About you." Valentina looked at the envelope, did not touch it yet. "What did he say about me?" Brielle's eyes held hers and didn't flinch. "He said you were going to take the fall for some financial thing. He didn't give me details. He said it like it was already done, like it was administrative, something he'd already handled." She swallowed. He sounded like he was describing closing a business account. The cafe moved around them. A barista called an order. 2 women at a table near the window laughed at something on a phone. Valentina picked up the envelope. She did not open it at the table. She held it, and she felt its weight, which was considerable. And she thought about Lorenzo drunk and loose-tongued telling a 24-year-old girl that his wife's financial ruin was already administrative, already handled, a closed account. "He said one more thing," Brielle said. Her voice had dropped slightly. "He said once everything was settled, he was taking you for everything you had left." Those were his words, everything she has left. Like, she stopped again. "Like he'd already taken most of it," Valentina said. Yes, the silence between them was a different kind now. Not adversarial, not exactly comfortable. The silence of 2 women who have discovered they were both in the same building when the walls started coming down, just on different floors. "Why are you giving me this?" Valentina said. Not suspicious, genuinely asking. Brielle looked at her hands on the table. They were still, but the stillness was effortful. "Because I was stupid," she said. "Not naive, stupid. There's a difference. Naive is when you don't know better. Stupid is when some part of you knows something's wrong and you ignore it because the alternative is admitting you made a bad choice." She looked up. "I made a bad choice, and he used it. And I'm not going to sit somewhere and be used." The word came out with force, quiet but definite. "I'm not going to be something that happened to you that he walks away from clean." Valentina looked at her for a long moment. The recording, she said. How clear is it? Clear enough. I'm going to need to share it with my legal counsel. I know, that's why I brought it. Brielle paused. What happens after? After the gala? After all of it. Valentina thought about the answer honestly, the way she'd been thinking about most things over the past weeks, without decoration, without the practiced social fluency that had been her default. For so long, it had started to feel like her actual voice. I don't know exactly, she said. The financial case files the morning after the gala. There will be investigations. His name will be in rooms he won't be able to control. And your documentation, she held up the envelope slightly, creates a separate evidentiary track that protects you by establishing that you were misled and materially deceived. Will it actually protect me? Marcus will make sure it does. She set the envelope down. But Brielle, I need you to do something at the gala that requires you to be in that room. Brielle was very still. What kind of something? Valentina told her. She watched the girl's face as she described it. The stage, the moment, the necklace, the specific choreography of a truth delivered in a room full of people who would ensure it could never be buried. She watched Brielle's expression move through things in sequence. Surprise, then a brief flash of something that might have been fear, then something harder and more settled underneath. When Valentina finished, Brielle was quiet for a moment. He'll be there, she said. Yes. He'll see me. Yes. And then what happens to him? Then, Valentina said, he lives in the world he built. Another silence. Okay, Brielle said. You don't have to. I said okay, firmly, the voice of someone who had made a decision and didn't want to be talked back from it. I'll be there. I'll wear it. A short pause. And then it goes back to you. Valentina looked at her. This young woman in a coat with a worn strap, who had made a bad choice and was choosing now to make a different one, and who had the specific dignity of someone who was not asking for absolution, only for the chance to do one right thing. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel, something that was almost gratitude. Thank you, she said. Brielle nodded once. Then she stood, pulled her coat tighter, and left without looking back. Valentina was in the foundation offices the following morning when Marcus called, and she knew from the first syllable that something was wrong. Not the careful but measured tone he used for difficult information. Something different. Something she had not heard from Marcus Webb in 21 years of working together, and which she identified, with a cold drop in her stomach, as controlled alarm. Come to my office, he said. Now, please. Marcus, what? Now, Valentina. She was in a cab within 4 minutes. Marcus was standing when she came in, which he never did. He was standing at the window with his back to the door, and he turned when she entered, and she saw it immediately on his face. The specific expression of a man about to hand someone something that cannot be handed back. Sit down, he said. Tell me what happened. Sit down first. She sat. He came to the desk but didn't sit himself. He picked up a document from the surface, a single page printed, with the header of a financial regulatory body she recognized, and he held it without giving it to her. Last night, he said, the SEC filed a preliminary inquiry into the Ashcroft Foundation. She heard the words individually in sequence, and they did not immediately assemble into meaning. What? A complaint was filed 4 days ago, anonymous, alleging financial impropriety in the Foundation's grant disbursement process, specifically alleging that Foundation funds were directed toward entities with undisclosed relationships to the Foundation's board members. He paused. The complaint names you as the responsible party. The room was completely silent. That's not possible, she said. The complaint includes documentation, financial records showing Foundation disbursements to a company called Veritas Community Partners, a nonprofit that received 3 grants over 2 years totaling $1.2 million. He finally set the document on the desk and pushed it toward her. Veritas Community Partners shares a registered agent with Carver Holdings. She looked at the document without touching it. Carver Holdings, the first shell, the one Lorenzo had used to funnel money from the Ashcroft Trust. He seeded it, she said. It appears that Veritas was established specifically to receive foundation grants that could then be connected back to the shell structure. The grants look, on paper, like Valentina Ashcroft Moretti directing foundation funds toward entities she controls through Lorenzo's criminal financial network. I don't control anything through... I know that. Marcus's voice was careful, precise. But the document trail without context reads as though you do. And an anonymous complaint to the SEC, combined with the Cayman account in your name, combined with this... He stopped. He's building a case against you, before you can build one against him. The cold that moved through her then was different from everything that had come before. It was not the cold of grief or betrayal, or even the cold clarity of strategic thinking. It was the cold of a trap snapping shut, the specific physical sensation of understanding that the walls you thought were the boundaries of a room are actually closing in. He had filed the complaint, or had someone file it, 4 days ago, before the gala, before any of her filings were ready. He had moved first. "How bad is it?" she said. "A preliminary inquiry is not a charge. It's an investigation trigger." Marcus finally sat down, heavily, in a way she had never seen him move. "But it freezes the Foundation's ability to disperse funds pending the inquiry. It creates a public record. And it means that when your filings go out the morning after the gala, Lorenzo's legal team will immediately point to the SEC inquiry as evidence that the financial accusations against him are retaliatory." "He's making me look like the aggressor," she said. "He's making you look like the criminal." The bluntness of it landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "Valentina, I have to be honest with you. This changes the landscape significantly. If the SEC inquiry gets traction before we can establish the full picture of what he's done..." "How did he know?" She heard her own voice, flat and hard in a way she hadn't heard before. "How did he know to move now? We haven't filed anything. We haven't..." She stopped. Something moved in Marcus's expression. "Marcus." He was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "There's a possibility," he said carefully, "that there is a leak somewhere in our preparation process. Not..." He held up a hand before she could speak. "Not intentional. But the forensic accountant's office uses contract staff. And I have to be honest with you, we don't have complete visibility into who has seen what." She looked at him. 21 years. She had trusted this man with everything. Her father's estate, her mother's trust, and now the most dangerous dismantling of her adult life. "Are you telling me someone talked?" she said. "I'm telling you I can't rule it out. And I'm telling you that someone with access to the general shape of what we're preparing, also not the details, but the fact that something is coming, would give Lorenzo enough to move defensively." He met her eyes. "I don't know who. I'm looking." She stood up. She crossed to the window. The same window she'd stood at weeks ago when this had all been smaller, more manageable, a theft and an affair and an exit strategy. And she looked out at Lexington Avenue, and she breathed through her nose, one breath, another, until the thing inside her chest stopped trying to become something loud. "The gala is in 6 days, she said. "Yes. If we pull the filing back, if we delay..." "He wins the timeline," Marcus said. "He'll have the SEC narrative established before anything we file can contextualize it. And if we proceed as planned, we proceed knowing that his legal team is already aware something is coming. They'll be in that room. They'll have people there." She turned from the window. "What about Brielle's recording?" she said. Marcus paused. "What recording?" "In the envelope I gave you yesterday, there's a recorded conversation between Brielle and Lorenzo. She says he makes explicit statements about the financial plan, about leaving, about..." She stopped. "You haven't listened to it yet." "I only received the envelope this morning. I hadn't..." "Listen to it," she said. "Today. Now." She walked back to the desk and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at him directly. "Because if he says on that recording what Brielle told me he said, then we don't just have a financial paper trail, Marcus. We have him in his own words describing intent. And that changes what the SEC inquiry looks like. That changes everything." Marcus reached for the envelope. "I'll call you in 2 hours," he said. "1," she said. "I'll be waiting." She left. She did not go back to the penthouse. She walked. Manhattan in November, the cold coming up off the sidewalk through good shoes, the wind finding the gap between her collar and her jaw, People moving past her with the particular purposeful indifference of a city that had no time to notice anyone's crisis. She walked 8 blocks north and then east, and then she found herself on a bench in Central Park without quite remembering deciding to go there. And she sat with her coat pulled around her and looked at the path in front of her where a man was walking a dog, and 2 children were running ahead of someone pushing an empty stroller, and the trees were bare, and the sky was the color of old concrete. She had spent 23 years managing something that had, it turned out, been managing her. She thought about the SEC inquiry, about the Veritas entity set up with the patience and precision of someone who had been planning for a very long time, who had anticipated resistance and pre-built the countermeasures. Lorenzo had not built just an exit. He had built a fortress in her name and then filed a complaint that would ensure the first thing any investigator saw was her inside the fortress holding a match. She thought about the leak, about the contract staff at the forensic accountant's office, about the chain of people who had touched the edges of this preparation, about the paranoid calculation of trusting anyone with anything when the man you were moving against had 23 years of access to your life and knew exactly which walls held weight. And then she thought about something else. She thought about the recording. Brielle had said, he sounded like he was describing closing a business account. A man drunk enough to be specific enough to be recorded, specific enough that a 24-year-old woman with a background in estate law had understood immediately what she was hearing and had kept the file. Valentina sat on the bench, and for the first time in all of this, in all the weeks of careful movement, precise strategy, controlled compartmentalization, she felt afraid. Not the manageable fear that sharpens thinking, the other kind. The kind that lives in the body, in the back of the throat, in the weight of both hands in your lap. She had been building a case, Lorenzo had been building a case, and he had moved first. She looked at the bare trees, the gray sky. Her phone rang. 53 minutes, not the full hour. She answered. I listened to it, Marcus said. And? A pause that told her everything before he spoke. It's extraordinary, he said. The audio quality is surprisingly clean. He speaks for approximately 11 minutes. He describes the Cayman account. He names Carver Holdings. He makes explicit reference to the Ashcroft Trust as, and I'm quoting directly, money that was always going to end up somewhere better. And then, another pause. And then he describes you, Valentina. What he says about you personally. Tell me. He says, Marcus's voice shifted slightly, the shift of a man reading words that belong to a different register of cruelty than he anticipated. He says, she doesn't know what she is. She's a name on a door. I built everything that matters. She was just the signature at the bottom. The park around her was very quiet. She had known, in the abstract, that this was what the marriage had been. She had known it the way you know something you've been avoiding looking at directly. To hear it in his voice, through a 24-year-old woman's phone, drunk and definitive and utterly without doubt, she was just the signature at the bottom. That recording, she said, and her voice was completely steady, which surprised her, goes to the SEC directly, not attached to our filing, separately, before the gala, with a cover letter establishing its provenance and the witness who made it. She paused. Today, Marcus. Valentina, if we send it today. If Lorenzo has already moved, then the only way to get in front of this is to flood every channel simultaneously and not give his legal team a single clean surface to push against. She stood up from the bench. The cold hit her fully, the wind off the park. The Meridian documentation to the Financial Crimes Unit. The Cayman account documentation to the SEC. Brielle's recording is a separate submission establishing willful deception. And I want every journalist at the Aurora Legacy Gala, and there will be journalists, Marcus, there are always journalists, to have received by 7 p.m. the night of the gala a single-page summary of the Ashcroft Trust fraud. Valentina, that is, I know what it is. It's total exposure, no controlled release, no managed narrative, no single pressure point he can squeeze. She was walking now, moving back toward the park exit, her heels finding the path. He moved first because he thought I was building something slow and managed that he could counter, so I stopped being slow and managed. The personal risk to you is already real. She cut him off. He filed an SEC complaint with my name on it, Marcus. The risk to me is already real. The question is whether I manage it, or he does. She reached the park exit, and the city reassembled itself around her. Noise, movement, the specific pressure of Manhattan. And I'm done letting Lorenzo Moretti manage anything that belongs to me. A long silence. I'll need the rest of today and tonight, Marcus said. You have it. And Valentina He stopped. What? The personal security question. I wasn't being overcautious before. If Lorenzo receives the recording submission and understands what's coming before the gala, arrange it, she said. Discreetly. I don't want it visible. All right. She was moving through the midday crowd, the city indifferent around her, and she was thinking about 6 days. 6 days in which Lorenzo would receive, through channels he monitored, evidence that the thing he thought he had handled was not handled, that the woman he had called a signature at the bottom was now coming at him from every direction he hadn't covered. She was thinking about what happened to powerful men when they felt the floor shift and couldn't find the edge. And she was thinking about something Marcus had said weeks ago, the very first meeting. We only get one window. She had one window, 6 days. And then she thought about something else, something smaller, more specific, that landed with a weight disproportionate to its size. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nadia. Lorenzo's office called. He's moving the gala reservation, wants the full table relocated closer to the main exit. She read it twice. He was placing himself near the exit. He was already planning to leave. She typed back. Confirm the table change. Don't push back. Then she made one more call. Not Marcus. Not Nadia. The number rang twice. It's me, Valentina said when Brielle answered. Something's happened. The plan has changed. A beat of silence. Changed how? We're not waiting for the gala to begin it. We've already begun. She paused on the sidewalk, people flowing past her in both directions, the city moving the way it always moved, without pause, without mercy, without the slightest interest in any single person's crisis or courage. He moved first, Brielle, which means we don't get to be careful anymore. Another silence, longer. What do you need from me? Brielle said. The same thing. Exactly the same thing. Just faster. Valentina looked up at the building across the street, glass and steel, and all its floors stacked against the gray November sky. And I need to know, are you still in? The pause that followed was not the pause of someone deciding. It was the pause of someone who had already decided and was simply, the pause that followed was not the pause of someone deciding. It was the pause of someone who had already decided and was simply making sure her voice would come out right when she spoke. I'm in, Brielle said. Valentina closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Good. I'll contact you tonight with everything you need to know. She ended the call and stood on the sidewalk with the city moving around her and 6 days sitting on her chest like a stone. 6 days to dismantle 23 years. She started walking. The Aurora Legacy Gala occupied the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel on Fifth Avenue, a room that had hosted everything from presidential fundraisers to the kind of private celebrations that never appeared in any press coverage but were understood by everyone who attended to be the real transactions of New York power. The ceiling was 30 feet of hand-painted plaster. The chandeliers were original, restored twice at costs that would have funded small infrastructure projects. The room held 500 people comfortably and had hosted, over the years, the specific gravitational field of money and influence that made it the kind of space where what happened inside its walls became, by the following morning, the new shape of things. Valentina had attended 11 of these galas. She had chaired 3. She knew where every camera was positioned, which tables had the best acoustics for carrying sound to the stage, where the sight lines from the podium hit cleanly and where they fell into shadow. She knew that the room's PA system had a slight half-second delay on the left flank that made ambient speech slightly harder to parse. She knew that the press pool, 4 photographers, 2 society journalists, 1 live stream camera for the Foundation's website, was positioned in the northwest corner with a direct line to the stage and an angle that captured both the podium and the first 3 rows of tables. She had spent 23 years learning this room. She was going to use every inch of it. The 5 days before the gala moved in, a way she had never experienced time move before. Simultaneously compressed and granular, each hour containing the density of a week, each conversation carrying more weight than conversations were built to carry. Marcus filed. The forensic documentation went to the Financial Crimes Unit. The Cayman account package went to the SEC. Brielle's recording, with a cover letter establishing provenance and context, went to a separate SEC contact through a channel Marcus had used once before for a whistleblower matter and trusted precisely because it had worked then. The journalists received their single-page summary at 7:14 p.m. on the night before the gala. Not the night of, which would have given Lorenzo's people time to prepare a counterstatement during the event itself, but the night before, precisely timed so that the financial press would spend the morning of the gala making calls that Lorenzo's team would be forced to respond to before they ever walked into the Whitmore. She had not slept more than 3 hours any night that week. She had not let Lorenzo see a single thing. He left the penthouse at 6:15 on the night of the gala. Business first, he said. He'd arrive at the hotel separately. She had expected this. She waited until she heard the elevator close. Then she went to the study and sat for 7 minutes in the chair behind her desk and looked at the Ashcroft family portrait on the wall. Her parents, herself at 14, the space where Edmund should have stood, and she breathed. Just breathed. The way you breathe before something physical, before the body is asked to do something it has never been asked to do before. Then she stood, went to the bedroom, and finished dressing. The gown was black, full length, with a scarlet train that had been her mother's choice in another decade, and which Valentina had had reconstructed by a designer who understood that the point was not fashion, but armor. She put on the Ashcroft garnet earrings, not the sapphire, not tonight, not yet, and looked at herself in the mirror for one long moment. She looked like what she was, a woman who had made a decision and was walking into it. She picked up her bag, called Nadia, who confirmed the foundation's legal team was in position at the hotel, called Marcus, who said, "Everything filed, everything in motion, no reversals, you're clear." Called the private security detail Marcus had arranged, 2 people, discreet, already at the Whitmore. She did not call Brielle. She had spoken to Brielle the night before, for 43 minutes. She knew everything the girl needed to know. The rest was up to her. Valentina took the elevator down and got into the car that was waiting and looked out the window at Manhattan sliding past in its November dark, all lit glass and moving light, and she did not let herself think about anything except what happened next. The ballroom was already 3/4 full when she arrived at 8:04. She stood for exactly 3 seconds at the top of the entrance stairs, long enough to let the room register her, not long enough to look like she was waiting for it to. Then she descended. The room noticed. Not all at once. And the way a room registers something significant, a ripple, starting from the people nearest the entrance and moving outward. The slight restructuring of attention that happens when someone walks into a space and the space responds. She had worn this gown once before, years ago, at a private dinner, and Lorenzo had told her it was too much. She had agreed and never worn it again. She moved through the room with the unhurried authority of a woman who had walked this floor 100 times and had no reason to hurry tonight of all nights. And she greeted people by name and shook hands and accepted a glass of water from a passing tray and touched shoulders and said the right things in the right voices and kept the deepest part of her attention on the periphery of the room, scanning. She found Lorenzo at 8:10. He was at table 7 near the main exit, his requested position, with his client, a wide-shouldered European man whose name she knew from the financial documents, but whose face she was seeing for the first time. Lorenzo was in a dark suit, his back slightly to the entrance, and he was holding a drink and talking with the cultivated ease of a man performing comfort for someone he needed to impress. He had not seen her yet. She moved to the opposite side of the room and did not look at him again. At 8:22, she saw Brielle. The girl had come in through the secondary entrance, the one on the south side, that was technically for foundation guests and donors without specific table assignments. Valentina had arranged her registration through a foundation board member who asked no questions. She was wearing a deep navy dress, simple, and the blue sovereign was at her throat. And even from across a crowded ballroom, the stone caught the chandelier light and held it with the quiet confidence of something that had been beautiful for 63 years and intended to go on being so. Their eyes met across the room. Brielle gave her a nod so small it was almost nothing. Valentina looked away. At 8:47, the Foundation's executive director took the stage for the first round of remarks, and the room resettled into the specific attentive posture of 500 people performing interest in a prepared speech. Valentina was at her table, table 1, front left, her position as honorary chair for the third consecutive year. And she sat with her back straight and her hands still, and she listened to the remarks with exactly the expression they deserved. Across the room, she could feel Lorenzo's presence without looking at it, the way you feel a fire without facing it. She had thought in the weeks of preparation that the moment she stood up and walked to that stage would feel like something enormous, like the physical expression of everything that had accumulated. She had imagined her hands shaking, her heart going wrong, the specific malfunction that happens when the body understands that what's about to happen cannot be undone. What she actually felt, sitting at table 1 with the room settling around her in 8 minutes until her cue, was something quieter and more absolute. She felt finished waiting. The executive director's remarks concluded at 9:01. Brief applause. The room reshuffled, the ambient noise of 500 people recovering their private conversations. And in that reshuffling, Valentina stood from her chair and crossed the 15 feet to the stage steps, and climbed them, and took the microphone before the room had fully registered the change. Silence came faster than it usually did. She stood at the podium and looked at the room. 500 faces. Politicians, judges, financial executives, corporate board members. The specific cross-section of New York that understood, collectively, that its own power derived from the coherence of shared appearances, that the story you told in rooms like this one was the story that became real. She had been part of that machinery for 23 years. She was about to show the room what the machinery actually ran on. "Thank you all for being here," she said. Her voice through the PA was clear, even, carrying the room easily. "I'll keep this relatively brief because I think what I have to say will be better served by directness than by length." Across the room, Lorenzo had turned to face the stage. She did not look at him. She looked at the room. "The Ashcroft Foundation was established by my family over 40 years ago," she said. "My parents built it from the belief that a family's wealth carries an obligation, not just to preserve itself, but to create conditions for others to build something of their own. That's the language of the Foundation's charter. I know it because I helped write the updated version 12 years ago, and because I've said it in rooms like this one more times than I can count." She paused. "Tonight I want to talk about something slightly different. I want to talk about what legacy actually means, not the word, the thing. The room was very still. "Legacy is what survives you, she said. "It's what you built that holds its shape after you're gone. And one of the ways you know something has real shape is when people try to take it." She let that land. "6 weeks ago, I learned that an heirloom belonging to my family, a piece of jewelry documented in 2 separate estate inventories as an Ashcroft family asset, with a provenance dating back to 1962, had been removed from my private possession and given away without my knowledge or consent. Stolen is the accurate word. I'll use it. Somewhere in the room, a chair moved. She felt rather than heard it. Alongside that theft," she continued, "I learned that funds belonging to the Ashcroft Family Trust had been systematically diverted over a period of years through a set of shell entities into private accounts designed to look like ordinary business arrangements and structured specifically to obscure the beneficiary." A pause. "And I learned that one of those accounts had been established in my name, without my knowledge, to create the appearance that I was the architect of the fraud I was actually the victim of." The room was no longer still in the way it had been still before. It was the stillness of 500 people holding a collective breath. She looked at the northwest corner. The press pool camera had its red light on. "Good. I'm not going to name the shell entities tonight," she said. "Their documentation has already been submitted to the appropriate regulatory bodies. I'm not going to detail the financial figures because those figures are already in the hands of investigators who are considerably more qualified than I am to determine what they mean legally." She paused again. "What I'm going to do is something simpler." She looked for the first time directly at Lorenzo's table. He was looking back at her. He had gone very still. Not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of a man who is running calculations at speed, who is assessing, who is trying to find the angle, the pressure point, the thing he can press to stop what is happening. She watched him find nothing, and watched him understand that he was finding nothing, and she held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away. "There is a woman in this room tonight," she said, "who has been in possession of an Ashcroft family heirloom. Not by her own wrongdoing. She was given it under false pretenses, told it belonged to the person who gave it. When she learned the truth, she called me. And tonight—" She let the sentence hang for just a moment. And across the ballroom, Brielle Monroe stood up. The room turned. Valentina watched it turn. 500 heads, 500 pairs of eyes, tracking toward a young woman in a navy dress rising from a chair near the south wall. The blue sovereign caught the chandelier light one more time, a small blue fire at her throat. Brielle walked across the ballroom. It was perhaps 40 feet. She walked it in the specific way of someone who has decided to do something and is not going to let the distance of it change their mind. The room was completely silent except for the sound of her heels on the floor. She stopped at the foot of the stage steps, looked up at Valentina, reached up, unclasped the necklace, and held it up. Valentina came down the 2 steps and took it from her hands. The clasp was cold against her fingers. The stone was heavier than she remembered. She held it in both hands, the way Eleanor Ashcroft had held it 60 years ago, the way you hold something you understand the weight of. And she looked at it for 1 full second before she closed her fingers around it. The room erupted. Not applause, not yet. The eruption of 500 people simultaneously generating conversation, the specific noise of a large group trying to process something that has landed faster than expected. She could hear her name moving through the room. She could hear Lorenzo's name moving through the room. She could see in her peripheral vision the press pool camera light steady and red. She raised her voice over the noise. Not a shout, just the projection of someone who has practiced for 30 years the particular skill of being heard in a full room. The Ashcroft Foundation's board of directors voted last week to restructure the foundation as a fully independent institution, with governance independent of any family business arrangements. A pause. That restructuring is effective immediately. The endowment has been transferred to an independently managed trust. The foundation's work, its grants, its programs, its commitments to the students and communities it serves will continue without interruption. She looked at the room, because the work was never about any one person's name. It was always about what the work built. From table 7, near the main exit, Lorenzo stood up. She watched him stand, watched the European client look between Lorenzo and the stage with the expression of a man recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the evening he was attending. Watched 2 men at the adjacent table, men she recognized as having been at Lorenzo's dinners, men whose specific orbit around him she had cataloged in the leather notebook, also start to move. Lorenzo took 1 step toward the stage. She spoke directly to him, not loudly, but the PA was live and the room was close enough to silence that it carried. "The financial documentation I mentioned," she said, "has been filed with the SEC, the Financial Crimes Division, and the Office of the State Attorney General. Filing times are on record as of this morning." A pause. "Leaving the building won't change that." He stopped. He stood in the middle of the ballroom floor with 500 people watching him, and the press camera finding him and his own client 3 feet behind him with the specific stillness of a man who has just understood that his exit from this investment needs to begin immediately, and Lorenzo Moretti, who had spent 23 years being the man who controlled the room, stood completely still and could find nothing to control. She watched his face. She had prepared herself for anger, for the specific cold fury of a man whose plans had been publicly detonated. What she saw instead was something she had never seen on his face in 23 years. He looked old, not physically. Physically, he was the same man, but something behind his eyes had aged in the span of 60 seconds, had shed the sustained performance of invulnerability that she now understood had been the foundational structure of everything: the marriage, the empire, the carefully cultivated terror. And what was left underneath was smaller than the performance, and knew it. The silence in the room had a specific quality. She had been in enough rooms to know this quality. The silence of an audience that has just seen the thing they were watching become real. Her hand tightened around the blue sovereign. Then several things happened at once. A man in a dark suit, not one of Lorenzo's, entered from the south door, and crossed the room with the specific, purposeful efficiency of someone who is there to do a job and has done it many times. He was followed by two others. They did not run. They walked at the exact pace of people who have no need to run because the thing they are moving toward has nowhere to go. Lorenzo saw them. She watched him see them. Watched the calculation run one final time. The exit behind him, the distance to the north door, the specific arithmetic of a man deciding whether the thing he is considering is worth doing, and watched the calculation come up empty. One of the men reached table 7. She did not hear what was said. The room's ambient noise had returned, louder now, a controlled chaos of 500 people talking at once, and the PA was no longer live, and she was standing at the foot of the stage steps holding her grandmother's necklace in both hands, watching the shape of 23 years finally come fully apart. Someone touched her arm. She turned. Isabel Crane, yellow blazer replaced tonight with something black and appropriate, her face carrying an expression Valentina had never seen on it before. Not the social competence Isabel wore as a default, but something rawer and more honest. "Val," she said. Just that. "I'm all right," Valentina said, because she was. She was something more specific than all right. She was present, every cell of her present, her hands completely steady, and the necklace in them, and the room loud around her, and the cold of the stone against her palms, as real as anything had ever been. Across the ballroom, Lorenzo was being guided toward the south exit by the 3 men in dark suits, his client already gone, the table's 7 chairs empty, and the specific vacuum that forms when power leaves a room, spreading outward from that corner like weather. Brielle was still standing 3 feet away. Valentina turned to her. The girl's face was doing several things at once. She had not fully prepared herself for what it would feel like to walk across a ballroom in front of 500 people, and the aftermath of it was visible in the slight shake of her jaw, the brightness of her eyes, the way she was holding herself very straight because she understood that if she stopped holding herself straight, something might come undone. "You all right?" Valentina said. Brielle let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I don't know yet." "That's honest." "Yeah." She looked at the empty table 7, then back at Valentina. "Is it done?" Valentina looked around the room. At the press pool camera, light still red. At the tables of New York's power structure rearranging themselves in real time around what they had just witnessed. At the south door through which Lorenzo Moretti had just exited the most important room of his professional life for the last time. "The beginning of it," she said. "The rest is lawyers and time." Brielle nodded slowly. Then she looked at the necklace in Valentina's hands. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "I should have known it wasn't. I should have asked more questions." "You asked them when it mattered," Valentina said. From somewhere in the ballroom, someone began to applaud. It started at one table, she didn't see which, and it moved outward the way the earlier ripple of attention had moved, table by table, until it was the whole room, and the sound of it was filling the 30-foot plaster ceiling and the original chandeliers and all the air in between. And Valentina stood at the foot of the stage steps holding the blue sovereign and did not move. She did not raise her hands, did not perform humility or triumph. She stood completely still in the center of what she had built, and let the sound wash over her, and thought about nothing except the weight of the stone in her. She stood completely still in the center of what she had built, and let the sound wash over her, and thought about nothing except the weight of the stone in her hands. And then the applause began to thin at the edges the way applause always does. From the outside in, table by table, releasing the sound back into conversation. And Valentina Ashcroft. Moretti uncurled her fingers and looked at the blue sovereign one more time before she closed her hand around it and walked, without hurry, toward the south exit through which Lorenzo had gone, not after him, just away from the stage, away from the cameras and the faces and the specific noise of 500 people reorganizing their understanding of an evening that had not gone the way anyone planned. She needed 30 seconds of quiet. She found it in the corridor outside the ballroom. Marble floors, low lighting, the muffled sound of the room behind the closed doors, and she stood against the wall and breathed. Her hands were still steady. She noticed this the way you notice something about your body after you've asked it to do something extreme. with a mild, detached surprise, the way a runner notices at the finish line that their legs are still working. The corridor was not entirely empty. A catering staff member passed with a tray, looked at her, looked away. A man she half recognized from the foundation board appeared from around a corner, saw her face, and made the intelligent decision to keep walking. She had maybe 4 minutes before someone she knew would come looking. She used them. She thought about Lorenzo's face in that final moment before the men in dark suits reached table 7. The calculation emptying out. The performance finally, visibly, costing more than he had left to spend on it. She had spent weeks steeling herself against a version of this night where something went wrong, where he found the pressure point, where his lawyers materialized something fast enough to slow the filing, where the room turned in a direction she hadn't prepared for. She had war-gamed the failure modes the way her father had taught her to war-game everything. Assume the worst, build for the worst, and then proceed anyway. What she had not war-gamed was this specific feeling, not triumph. Triumph was what you felt when you won something you'd been fighting for. This was older and stranger than triumph. The feeling of a woman standing in a corridor holding her grandmother's necklace after a night that had taken everything she'd built her adult life around and broken it open, and discovering that what was inside was not nothing, was not the ruin she'd been afraid of finding, was something she recognized, herself. The door behind her opened. Isabel. "There are 3 journalists who want to comment," Isabel said. She said it without preamble because she had known Valentina long enough to know that preamble was not what was needed. "Marcus is dealing with 2 of them. The third one," a pause. "She's young. She's not society press. She's from a financial publication, and she has the single-page summary in her hand, and she's asking very specific questions about the Meridian project. Tell her Marcus will have a formal statement by morning." "I did. She said she'd wait." Valentina almost smiled. "Tell her I appreciate her patience." Isabel looked at her for a moment. At the necklace in her hand, at the slightly wrecked quality that Valentina knew was visible now in her face. Not breakdown, not collapse. Just the particular transparency that comes after you've held something tightly for a very long time and finally let it do what it needed to do. "Are you actually all right?" Isabel said. Not the social version of the question. The real one. "I'm going to be," Valentina said. "That's not the same thing as all right now, but it's true." Isabel nodded slowly. Then she reached out and briefly, firmly, squeezed Valentina's hand, the one not holding the necklace, and let go. "I'll handle the journalist," she said. "Go do whatever you need to do." She went back through the door. Valentina stood alone in the corridor for another 30 seconds. Then she walked to the far end of the hall, found a window that looked north toward the park, and stood there in the dark of the corridor with Manhattan spread below her and the blue sovereign cool and solid in her palm. And she let herself be, for just one moment, a woman at the end of a very long road, looking at what was on the other side. Lorenzo did not go quietly. She had not expected him to. The 3 days following the gala were the ugliest of the entire process. Not the controlled ugliness of discovering the extent of the theft, not the cold ugliness of understanding what the Cayman account had been designed to do, but the specific ugliness of a powerful man using every remaining resource to fight something that was already past fighting. His legal team filed 3 separate motions in the first 48 hours. They issued a public statement characterizing the gala as a theatrical and defamatory performance, staged by a woman motivated by personal grievance and financial self-interest. They contacted 2 members of the foundation board and implied, through language precise enough to be deniable, that Valentina's mental stability should be a matter of board concern. She heard about each of these things from Marcus and did not respond to any of them publicly. "Let the filings speak," she told Marcus on the second morning, sitting across from him in his office with coffee she was actually tasting for the first time in weeks. Every time his team makes noise, they're drawing attention to the noise. Let the documentation be the thing that's loud. "His criminal defense counsel is very good," Marcus said. "I know." She had researched the firm the moment she learned they'd been retained. But very good isn't the same as having a case. She set down her coffee. "What's the status of the Meridian track?" "The Financial Crimes Unit has opened a formal investigation. The Meridian Project's municipal approval process is now part of that inquiry. 3 of the project's contractors have already retained separate counsel, which tells us they're preparing to cooperate rather than defend." And the SEC? The Cayman account has been frozen. The inquiry into the foundation has been suspended pending the new evidence, Brielle's recording in particular. The investigator I spoke with yesterday used the word exculpatory. He said the word with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been waiting to use it. The anonymous complaint against the foundation is now itself part of a parallel inquiry into whether the complaint was filed as part of the broader fraud. Lorenzo had tried to make her the criminal. The filing designed to do that was now evidence against him. She thought about the 7 years it had taken him to build the structure. She thought about the 4 days it had taken for the structure to become a liability instead of a weapon. The divorce filing, she said. Ready when you are. She had signed the authorization 3 days before the gala. She had not filed it then because filing it before the gala would have given Lorenzo a specific legal event to react to, something to point to as cause. Now there was no ambiguity about cause. Now there was documentation and recordings and regulatory investigations and the entire ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel as witness. File it today, she said. Marcus made a note. Asset division will be contested. Let him contest it. He has $27 million in documented stolen Ashcroft trust funds against any claim he makes to marital assets. His lawyers can contest for as long as they want. The math doesn't change. It will take time. I know. She looked out his window at Lexington Avenue. The same view as the first morning, same building going up 2 blocks east, more of it visible now. The steel frame had acquired floors, was beginning to look like what it was going to become. I have time. Betrayal. She moved out of the penthouse on a Thursday, not dramatically. No confrontation, no final scene in the room she'd lived in for 11 years. Lorenzo was not there. He had moved to a hotel the morning after the gala at the suggestion of his own legal counsel, who had presumably explained to him that the optics of remaining in the marital home while under federal investigation were not useful. She had the building's management change the locks as a formality. She did not feel the need to be present for it. She took 3 things from the penthouse: the leather notebook from the locked desk drawer, the Ashcroft family portrait from the study wall, and the French press. Everything else she left. The movers, when they came later that week to clear her personal belongings, told her afterward that the penthouse had looked like a hotel that someone had been living in. All the surfaces clean and correct, and nothing that looked like anyone's actual life. She understood. She had been maintaining a set for 23 years. The set was Lorenzo's. She had never fully moved in. She went to the Ashcroft estate in Connecticut. She had not intended to stay more than a week. There were foundation matters in the city, meetings with Marcus that needed to happen in person, a board restructuring that required her attention. But she arrived on a Friday evening in the last of the November light, walked through the front door of the house where she had grown up, stood in the entry hall with its old wood smell and its particular quiet, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt in so long she'd stopped expecting to feel it. Safety. Not the performed safety of a penthouse with good security and a powerful husband. The bone-deep safety of a place that had known her before she knew herself, that contained her childhood and her parents and Edmund's ghost in the corner room and every version of herself she had ever been. She stayed for 3 weeks. Ciao. Brielle called on the 2nd week. Valentina was in the estate's library, going through the foundation's restructured governance documents, when the phone rang. She answered without checking the name first. She had been doing that lately, answering without checking, a small, deliberate practice in the direction of being less defended than she'd spent 23 years being. "How are you doing?" Brielle said. It was a simple question. People asked it without meaning it constantly. From this particular person, at this particular moment, it was not simple and did mean something. "Better than I was," Valentina said. "Worse than I will be. You?" A short pause. "Similar." Then, "I left the apartment, the one he was partially funding. I found a studio in Astoria. It's small, really small." A sound that was almost a laugh. "I have to take my suitcase into the bathroom to open it fully." "Are you working?" "I have a paralegal position starting in January, downtown firm, estate law." A pause. "Full circle, I guess. That's good work." "Yeah." A silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The silence of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space. I've been thinking about what you said at the cafe, about what kind of person I'd be on the other side of this. What about it? I think I know now. Brielle's voice had a quality Valentina hadn't heard in it before. Not the careful steadiness of the cafe or the controlled nerves of the gala, but something quieter and more settled. The voice of a person finding solid ground and being surprised by what it feels like underfoot. I think I'm the kind of person who's going to ask more questions before she trusts anything again, which sounds small. But for me, it's not small, Valentina said. No. A pause. I wanted to say thank you for not... You could have made me the villain of this. It would have been easier. Valentina thought about that. About the version of this story where she'd gone to the restaurant that Tuesday and made a scene and the girl became the target, and Lorenzo recalibrated quietly and walked away clean. It wouldn't have been accurate, she said, and I needed accurate more than I needed easy. Is that something your dad taught you? The question surprised her enough that she was quiet for a moment. Partly. Partly I learned it the hard way. Most things seem to be like that. Yes, Valentina said. They do. After she hung up, she sat in the library for a while without going back to the governance documents. She looked at the bookshelves her father had built, the specific arrangement of spines she had memorized in childhood, the small framed photograph on the third shelf. Her parents, early in their marriage, standing outside this house in summer. Her mother squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. Her father looking at her mother with the specific expression of a man who knows exactly where his life's center of gravity is. She had thought, for a long time, that she had chosen the same thing. She understood now she had chosen someone who wore the same shape as that and was not it. She reached up and touched the photograph frame, left her fingers there for a moment. Then she went back to work. Marcus called in the third week with the update she'd been tracking. 3 of Meridian's contractors had formally cooperated with the financial crimes investigation. The Carver holding structure had been fully mapped, the Cyprus entity, the Cayman account, the Eduardo Moretti registered agent trail, all of it documented and entered into evidence. The SEC inquiry had expanded from the Ashcroft Foundation matter into a broader securities investigation that involved the financing instruments Lorenzo had used to establish the shell structure in the first place. And Eduardo, living in Mallorca, had retained his own counsel and provided a sworn statement that his name had been used without his knowledge or consent. Eduardo's cooperation is significant, Marcus said. It closes the last gap in the beneficial ownership question. How long until the criminal charges? The financial crimes investigation is still open. Formal charges would follow an indictment, which requires the grand jury process. Marcus paused. 6 months to a year, realistically. Possibly longer. 6 months to a year of Lorenzo's lawyers fighting every step. 6 months to a year of motions and counterfilings and the specific grinding machinery of a legal process designed to take time. She had thought this would frustrate her. It didn't. She had already done the waiting. The waiting was over. What came next was just time passing while the consequences did what consequences did. Moved forward, accrued, became irreversible. The Divorce Asset Division, she said. His team has filed a counterclaim asserting that certain marital assets... I know what they've filed. She had read every document. Walk me through the exposure. He did. For 40 minutes, line by line, the way she had asked him to do everything since the beginning, completely, without softening, without the paternalistic management of information that she had received from too many people over too many years, and which she understood now as a form of control wearing the costume of protection. She listened and she asked questions and she pushed back on 2 points, where his analysis struck her as too conservative, and she accepted his correction on 1 point where she had misread a filing date. At the end, she had a clear picture. It would take time. It would be contested at every turn by lawyers being paid to contest it. She would not emerge from this with everything intact. No one emerged from 23 years and a fraudulent exit strategy and an SEC investigation with everything intact. There would be costs, legal fees, time, the specific tax of being right in a system that made being right expensive. But the Ashcroft Foundation would survive. Independent, restructured, with governance that couldn't be reached by anyone's marital arrangements. The trust documentation, now fully audited, had established the baseline of what was owed. The shell structure's paper trail was complete. And the 27 million, while not fully recoverable, some of it had moved through too many layers and too much time, was documented. Its existence, its source, its destination, all of it on record in a way that could not be undone. It was enough. She said so to Marcus. Is it? He said, not challenging her, genuinely asking. She thought about the question honestly. 27 million is not a number I can feel, she said. It's too large. What I can feel is the necklace, the vault. His face the night I came home from 11 Madison, watching me to see if I knew. She paused. What I can feel is that he built something designed to destroy me, and I'm sitting in my family's library having a conference call about asset recovery timelines, and he's in a hotel in Midtown with 3 lawyers and a federal investigation. A short silence. That, Marcus said, is a reasonable measure of enough. She stayed at the estate through December. She had not planned to. The governance work could be done from anywhere, and the city was where most of the legal process needed her attention, and she was aware that staying in Connecticut felt like an avoidance she would eventually have to reckon with. The specific avoidance of returning to a version of her life that no longer had the architecture she'd built it around. But December in Connecticut was cold and quiet, and the house held her in the way that houses sometimes hold people, and she needed for a while to be held. She walked every morning. The estate had 11 acres, and she covered most of them each day. Through the rear garden, which her mother had spent 30 years maintaining, and which was bare now, and skeletal, and somehow more honest than it was in summer, through the stand of old oak trees at the property's eastern edge, along the stone wall that her father had repaired himself one summer when she was 8, and which still stood exactly as he'd left it. She thought, on these walks, about the things she had not let herself think during the weeks of preparation and execution. Small things. The weight of a ring she had not yet formally removed. The specific way Lorenzo laughed. A real laugh. Not the social one. The one that came out of him unexpectedly and that she had loved early on, with the uncomplicated love of a woman who has found something in a complicated man that feels like the truth of him. She did not know now whether that laugh had been real or performed or some third thing that was both and neither. She thought about Edmund because she always thought about Edmund in December, because he had loved December in a way that had always struck her as almost excessive. The cold, the bare trees, the early dark, and which she understood better now than she had when he was alive. There was something clarifying about a landscape that had taken everything off and was just itself. She thought about what she was going to build next. Not reconstruct, not restore. The foundation would be restored, that work was already underway. The governance restructured, the endowment secured, the programs protected. But she was not going to reconstruct her own life, which was different. Reconstruction meant using the same blueprint. She was not going to use the same blueprint. She was going to do something she had not done since she was young enough to do it, without knowing it was a skill. She was going to build from what she actually was, rather than from what a particular life required her to be. She did not know yet exactly what that looked like. She found, walking through the bare oak trees on a cold December morning with frost on the stone wall, and her breath making small clouds in the sky overhead, the specific pale blue of deep winter, that not knowing didn't frighten her. It just felt like what was true. On the last day of the month, she took the blue sovereign from the velvet case she had placed it in the night of the gala and carried it downstairs to the library and set it on her father's desk in the morning light. She had looked at it many times since the gala, had held it once or twice, briefly, turning it in her hands the way you turn something you're trying to fully see. But she had not sat with it like this. In her family's house, in the room where her father had taught her to read a room, in the light coming through the east window that fell across the desk the same way it had fallen across it when she was 9 years old and watching her grandmother lift it from a velvet case. She sat in her father's chair and she looked at it. The blue sovereign was, objectively, a beautiful object. Oval cut, deep blue, 63 years old, the rose gold filigree worn slightly at one edge in a way that had never been repaired because Eleanor Ashcroft had felt the wear was honest. Valentina ran her thumb along that worn edge and felt what she had felt at 9 years old. The specific reality of something with weight and history, something that had been carried through time by people who understood what it meant to carry things. She had told Brielle the necklace represented her family's legacy. Sitting here in the December light, she understood it was more specific than that. The necklace was the thing that had started everything, the thing that had made the theft visible, that had walked her out of 23 years of managed blindness and into a corridor of herself she had not known was there. It was evidence and it was loss, and it was the reason a 24-year-old woman in Astoria had just taken a paralegal job and was starting over in a studio apartment small enough to require bathroom suitcase logistics. It was the thing that had been stolen and had, through its own theft, returned her to herself. She picked it up and held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. Then she went to the writing desk in the corner. Her mother's desk, smaller than her father's, the one with the good stationery in the top drawer. And she found a sheet of paper and a pen, and she wrote a single paragraph. Not a legal document, not a letter to Marcus or a statement for the foundation or a response to any of the filings. Just a paragraph, in her own handwriting, on her mother's paper, describing the necklace, its history, its provenance, its meaning in the language of someone who knew what it meant. And below that paragraph she wrote, "This belongs to whoever carries it forward with the understanding that it is not a possession. It is a record of what the women in this family have survived and built and refused to abandon. Whoever holds it next should know the weight is real, the history is real, and so are you." She folded the paper and placed it in the velvet case beneath the necklace. She did not know yet who would hold it next. She had no daughters. The Ashcroft line in her generation ended with her, Edmund gone at 22 with no children of his own. There would be someone, eventually, a niece from her cousin's line, or a young woman from the Foundation's programs who earned it in a way that had nothing to do with blood, or someone she hadn't met yet whose particular kind of survival would make her the right person to carry it. She would know when she found her. She closed the case. The last morning came without announcement, the way last mornings do. She woke up, and it was January, and the light through the bedroom curtains was slightly different than it had been, a degree or two further along toward the longer days that were still weeks away, but were coming. And she lay in the bed that had been her childhood bed for the first 12 years of her life, and she felt the particular texture of what the next part of her life was going to feel like. Not happiness, not yet, or not in the uncomplicated version, but something adjacent to it and honest, the way the bare garden was honest, the way the worn edge of the filigree was honest. She got up, made coffee with the French press, stood at the kitchen window of the Connecticut house, and watched the frost on the rear garden begin to lose its edge in the early light, the garden revealing itself slowly the way things revealed themselves when you stopped trying to manage how they looked and just let them be what they were. Her phone had 7 messages. 2 from Marcus, standard updates, nothing requiring immediate response. 1 from Isabel, who wanted to know when she was coming back to the city and had apparently made a reservation somewhere to mark the occasion, which was very Isabel. 1 from the Foundation's new executive director about the February board meeting agenda. 1 from a journalist whose name she recognized as the young woman from the financial publication who had waited in the corridor at the Whitmore with the single-page summary in her hand. The message said the profile piece she'd written had been accepted, and she wanted to verify a quote before publication, which Valentina filed under things to handle today. 1 from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be Eduardo Moretti, calling from Mallorca to say, in the stilted, formal English of someone who had prepared the message carefully, that he was sorry for what his brother had done, and that he hoped she knew he had cooperated fully, and that he had always thought she deserved better than what she'd been given. She listened to it twice, then she set the phone down. She thought about Eduardo, who had lived in Mallorca for 15 years, and had always been, at the family dinners she could still access in memory, a man in visible retreat, from Lorenzo, from the weight of being a Moretti, from whatever version of himself he'd been before his brother's shadow covered everything. She had never particularly liked him. She did not hold him responsible for the use of his name in a shell structure he hadn't known about. What she felt, listening to his careful message, was something she hadn't expected. She felt a small, clean sympathy for a man who had spent a long time inside the same thing she had, just in a different room. She picked the phone up and texted him back. "Thank you for what you did. It mattered." She set the phone down. The last message was from Brielle. Just 2 words. New Year. Valentina looked at it for a moment. Then she typed back, New Year. She drove back to the city on a Tuesday. Manhattan received her the way it always did, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, with the indifferent continuity of a place that had never paused for anyone's private events, no matter how enormous those events had felt from the inside. The traffic was its usual unreasonable self. The building going up 2 blocks east of Marcus's office had acquired another floor since she'd last looked at it. The French press survived the drive in the passenger seat, which she had not been certain of. She had not yet found a new apartment. She was staying at the Ashcroft Foundation's guest suite, a small, deliberately modest space that the foundation maintained for out-of-town board members, and she found, somewhat to her surprise, that the modesty of it did not bother her. After 11 years of the penthouse's calibrated grandeur, there was something restful about a room that made no argument about its own importance. She had one meeting that first day back, not Marcus, not the foundation board. She had those scheduled for the rest of the week. This meeting was at a coffee shop, not 11 Madison, not Margot on 79th, somewhere new, a place she had passed once walking and noted without going in. She arrived first this time too, ordered coffee, sat facing the door. Marcus arrived at 12:02. He sat down across from her, declined coffee, and looked at her with the assessment of a man who has known someone for 21 years and is taking in the current version. "You look different," he said. "I am different." "Good different." "I think so." She wrapped both hands around her coffee. "Tell me where we are," he told her. Everything, systematically, the way she'd asked him to do everything, the criminal investigation timeline, the divorce proceedings status, the asset recovery projections, the SEC inquiry into the anonymous complaint, the Meridian Project's collapse, which was now official and had taken with it several entities whose connection to Lorenzo's broader operation was only now becoming visible to the investigators who were looking. She listened. She asked questions. She pushed back in 3 places. When he finished, she sat with the information for a moment. "How long?" she said. "Until the foundation is fully clear. The SEC suspension on disbursements will lift within the month. The full audit is complete. The exculpatory finding is on record." He paused. "The foundation is clean, Valentina. It was always clean. What he built around it was the problem, and that's been separated." She nodded. "And personally? The divorce will take time, a year, possibly more, given the asset congestion. But the Ashcroft Trust documentation is airtight. What belongs to your family cannot be disputed." He held her gaze. "You will come out of this with everything that is actually yours." She thought about that phrase. Everything that is actually yours. She thought about what was actually hers. The foundation, the estate, the leather notebook, now closed and filed with Marcus's firm as a document in the evidentiary record. The French press, the blue sovereign in its velvet case with a folded letter underneath it. The capacity, which she had, it turned out, never lost, only buried, to observe, to record, to wait, and to respond when the moment was right. The person she was right now, sitting in a coffee shop on a January Tuesday in a city that had never cared about her crisis, coming back to her own life after walking through the ruin of a different one. That was hers. All of it was hers. "Good," she said. Marcus reached into his briefcase and set a document on the table. "One more thing. The legal name question. Post-divorce, you have the option to file for formal restoration of the Ashcroft name exclusively. Remove Moretti from the legal record. It requires a separate petition, but it's straightforward." She looked at the document. She thought about the name she had carried for 23 years. Valentina Ashcroft Moretti. 2 families, 1 hyphenated identity, the specific compound weight of being 2 things at once and belonging completely to neither. She picked up the document. "Where do I sign?" she said. Shocked. She walked back to the foundation afterward. Not because there was anything urgent waiting for her. There wasn't, or nothing that couldn't wait another hour. She walked because the city was cold and clear and she had been inside too long, and because she had walked 8 blocks north and then east on the day she'd sat on the bench in Central Park and felt afraid, and she understood now that the way you recovered from being afraid was not by not being afraid, but by walking anyway. She walked past a school where children were coming out for a late recess, their noise filling the block with something uncomplicated. past a bodega whose owner was stacking produce in the cold in the specific manner of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Past the scaffolded building, not Marcus's, a different one, the city was always scaffolding something, where a construction worker was eating a sandwich on a beam 3 floors up, his legs dangling, unbothered by the height. She thought about what she was going to do next year, specifically, concretely. Not the foundation. The foundation's work was clear and underway, and she would serve it as she had always served it, with her name and her attention and the specific competence of someone who had been paying attention to how things were built since she was young enough to sit at her father's dinner table. But beyond that. The next version of what Valentina Ashcroft, just Ashcroft, only Ashcroft, was going to build. She did not have the answer yet. She had something better. She had the question, and she was not afraid of it. And the city was cold and clear around her, and her heels found the pavement with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly where she was going, even when she didn't know what it was going to look like when she got there. The Ashcroft Foundation offices were on Park Avenue, 12 blocks north. She walked them. At the entrance to the building, she paused for a moment. Not hesitation, just the deliberate choice to be present at a threshold before crossing it. The doorman held the door. She thanked him by name, walked into the lobby and pressed the elevator button for the 14th floor. The doors closed. She stood alone in the elevator and looked at her reflection in its polished interior, and she saw, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, a woman she recognized without qualification. Not the woman who had managed a room, maintained a surface, administered a marriage. Not the woman who had stood at a penthouse window watching a city she'd been living in sideways for 23 years. This woman had been through something that had cost her everything. It cost her, and she was standing up in it, and her hands were steady, and the blue sovereign was in a velvet case on a desk in the Connecticut estate with a letter beneath it about what it meant to carry something forward. The elevator reached the 14th floor. The doors opened. Valentina Ashcroft walked into the first day of what was actually hers.